Welcome to the Happy Mindset. Today's episode is episode number 93, and today's episode is called Conscious Creating. So today I'm going to talk about conscious creating. This isn't it sounds quite esoteric, but it's actually quite a practical episode, I'm hoping, today. So I'm just going to talk about conscious creating because it wasn't something that I was aware of, that this is something you can benefit from. It's only been, I guess, 2 or 3 years into this now, and I don't know how many years before that where I was creating stuff, that I've realized over time that there's a lot of hidden benefits to creating things beyond just the likes and the followers and the listens and all that kind of stuff. So the metrics are important, but if you're somebody who wants to create, who wants to have something more to it than just that, because the thing is, if you're just doing things for likes and you're doing things for listens, then it's very easy to lose your sense of self in that. It's grand though if you want to create something and you want to have an income from it, or if you want to do something and you want to have engagement and that's what you're after. Once you're aware that that's what you're after, that's fine. But if you're not aware that you're after those things, that you're creating things because of that, then that can be very toxic. And I've had that experience before where it can become very, very toxic and you lose your sense of self-respect and self-worth. And like the nature of the internet today as well is that it's very addictive as well. So you're constantly checking your phone, constantly checking things. So I in saying that, I still have that as well, but I'm more aware of it. So I'm using this as like an anchor as well. So the conscious creation part is really about focusing on how you're actually creating yourself. What I found over the years is that I've actually been focusing my mind intentionally by doing this. So it's holding me accountable. It's holding my mind focused on something that's constructive in my life. Because without that focus, I just find that my mind, it just goes everywhere. It's got no purpose. It's got no direction in life. So there's no real power to that. What I found from creating is that it gives that outlet for me to create. It helps me to become more comfortable as well in who I am as a person as I move forward. I suppose it depends on your personality type, but I found podcasting and putting things online, I found it quite a challenging experience mentally and emotionally. I guess emotionally even more so. I guess what's helped me is that as I move forward, I'm never thinking the same way anyway. I guess that was my biggest fear, was that before I started doing this stuff, I thought I'd be saying things and I would have to stick to my guns, and then people would, when you say things that are quite kind of personal, or you say things that are just, you're speaking what's on your mind. And I thought that that would be something you can get very stuck in, people will ridicule you and you'll have to stand firm on what you said. But it comes back to this conscious creation. So creation is a continuous process. You're focusing on different threads of thoughts. You're creating things, and over time your material, your content actually evolves over time. So you're not going to stagnate, and you're not going to be holding on to things and having to combat people and prove them wrong and stuff. I guess that was one of the biggest blocks I had. And another thing that was linked to that was saying things that were maybe a bit, could be perceived as sappy or a bit naive or just in that domain. So what I found with that is that at the end of the day, it's somebody's perception of what I said is what they're bringing to that. It's their interpretation of that. Sometimes I will say something that I might think is quite sappy or quite what are you saying that for? But that helps me to actually just get to expressing things and just doing things more freely. Because if I'm limiting myself and saying things that I might perceive in my mind as being a bit sappy or naive, then I'm also going to start limiting myself in other areas. And then before you know it, I'm going to just be a person who's just reading from a script and just constricted. And I've led vast portions of my life like that. That's what the content creation process does for me. It gives me that outlet to start expressing things, start making sense of things, and with that as well, there's more of a flow to me. So I'm able to talk with more flow. So you might have noticed that episode 93, I'm able to like talk things out even more on an emotional level. So I'm feeling more coherent in what I'm saying than I was when I started this podcast. And when I started this podcast, I was still very much in my head. So you're going through different layers of that. So I'm still in my head, but I feel myself dropping more into coherence with my heart as well when I speak. So when you do that as well, you're starting to kind of play with concepts. So that's what's making it more enjoyable for me. That's one of the reasons why I'm doing more podcasts right now, because I actually really enjoy speaking things out, talking to people around my domains of interest. So that's been one of the what's the word? That's been one of the draining things in my life, has just been being around people where I'm just not engaged, or I'm just not, like, they're just not talking about things I want to be talking about. So I found that very energy sapping for me. And I've also found that like there's something wrong with me, that I'm not interested in other things. I am interested in a lot of different things, but there's certain things that I want to be talking more about, because I've just seen in the evolution myself that like they're things that light me up, and they're things that engage me in a constructive way, in a creative way. And I want to have more of that in my life. I want to have more of that, just aliveness and playing with things. And that's something I couldn't have done 2 years ago, because I would have been very analytical, very intellectual about this stuff. And in my mind, I would have been like, I'm not putting something out unless it's like 100% accurate and everybody perceives it like that. So that wouldn't have been exactly the words that were going through my head, but that was the feeling that was stopping me from just playing with things and just putting stuff out there and getting feedback. And so that's a continuous process. I probably talk a lot about these types of things, but it's as you go through it, it's more on the experiential level. It's more as you do it, as you get comfortable with yourself and the way you express things. And then as you do that, you can take on feedback a bit better. And that's what the creation process can do for you. And you don't need any momentum, any likes or engagement or anything like that. That'll happen naturally anyway. Like, the thing is, like, I've got 93 episodes now. Just from sheer quantity, my numbers are going up. Like, they're not going up massively. I have seen a gradual increase in them, but just from sheer quantity, they're going to go up anyways. So they're not going to go backwards, because you're creating more episodes and stuff. So I wanted to talk about that today, because I found when I started this stuff that I felt like I needed to be getting momentum after 6 months or a year, and I thought I was playing it long term back then. Like, I'm 2 years into this, 2.5 years into this, and I wouldn't consider that I have huge momentum at all in this, but yet I still enjoy doing it. And so that's why I had to start questioning this. I was like, well, why am I doing this then? And that was one of the things that's coming down to. It's that, like, I actually like the type of person I'm becoming. Like, I didn't like myself when I wasn't doing things that were forcing me to grow as a person. So, like, in life, you're going to meet different types of people all the time, and they trigger you in different ways. And sometimes you don't like a person, you don't know why you don't like a person. It's just some vibe there, and you just can't figure it out intellectually. So life is difficult. So I found that the best way to approach life is to learn the lessons, to move forward to the next level. And sometimes that's difficult. Sometimes it requires swallowing your ego. Sometimes as well, it's like not being too tough on yourself. That's a lesson that I'm learning just more recently now. That I think at one point I realized that, like, it was my own self that was getting in the way. That I had to like swallow my pride, swallow my ego to move forward. But there's also another side to it, that sometimes you can be too harsh on yourself, and like, you're not going to have the impact with people if you're not going to be confident and you're not like believing in yourself. And so like, you need to bring that into balance, where like you're believing in yourself as well. So that's when I started copying on more to the fact that, okay, I'm being too tough on myself. So I kind of went to the other extreme. So I went from one extreme to the other. But I think, again, I might do an episode on this, because the extremes, I think I'd love to not go from one extreme to the other. But then if you think about it experientially, how do you even know where one extreme is and the other extreme is if you haven't been there, and then you can see the contrast in the middle. That's what this podcast is helping me to do too. Creating in general, writing in general, it helps me to see the nuances between things. So nuances exist. I feel nuances exist in reality and experience from doing things. That's where you see the nuance, because that's where you're faced with a lot of difficult emotions and frustration and overwhelm, joy and ecstasy as well. That's where you're going to start figuring out the nuance, because it's practical, real world stuff, and you want to have a life where you feel like you're making progress. You feel like you're happy with yourself, that you're progressing in life. And the way I've gone about that too is to look more internally, look more at like what actually lights me up, what makes me happy, and that other people don't have to necessarily get it. And to even see the what I get a lot of joy from is to see the link between my internal state and the outside world. So like when you start looking at that, it frees you a lot more from circumstances, because a lot of the things that kind of screwed me over in the past and continue to some extent today are the expectations, just these kind of invisible scripts, these expectations that I have, and they're part of the game too, like, because you want to move forward in some direction, so in order to do that you have to have some sort of expectation of what you want. So it's navigating that. So that's what creating does for me. That's what this process does for me. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of messiness. There's a lot of messiness to it. But it does give you that purpose every day to wake up in the morning and go, geez, I can create something here. I can write things. I can do things in a different way. Like, another thing I want to hit home at is when I first came across this idea that like your thoughts shape your reality. I think I had a poster in my room for a long time, a Buddha quote, and it was what was the quote? I had one thing from Mahatma Gandhi. It was like, be the change you want to be in the world. It was over my bed. And the other one was, it was pretty much the essence of it was from Buddha. It was your thoughts become your reality. And I was always looking at that and I was like, that would be lovely to have, but I don't believe that. I want to believe that. That's why I have it on the wall, but I don't fully believe that. That's not my experience in reality yet. So the best way I've seen to start seeing the power of thought, you don't have to believe that thoughts create the universe and stuff, because that's a very deep thing to realize if it's going to have any effect in your life. The way I've gone about it is to create for sustained periods of time. And so I've just noticed over the last 5, 6, maybe 10 years now, how my mind generally feels now. What are the kind of default thoughts coming in? So I found that there's a lot less negative default thoughts 10 years down the line than there was 10 years ago, because I've been intentional about what I believe, and I've been intentional with writing. So with writing, like, that forces you to become intentional with the thoughts that are going through your head, and it forces you to make some sense of that, so you can not get lost in that soup of just like confusing thoughts. So that was generally the way I was living before. It was like a soup of thoughts, random thoughts, some good, some bad. Still have that today, but the creation process gives you that opportunity to put a spoon in and go, what's this thought say? How does this connect to that? Like, you're being intentional about it, and then over time, the long-term approach, years and years, you start seeing the effects of that. Like, your default thoughts become better quality thoughts. The negative thoughts that come into your mind, you believe them less and less, depending on where you're at with certain things. So that's just a general feel to it. So like that's the creation process, and that's what it gives me under the hood. That's mainly why I do this. That's why I show up every day and do this. That's what it gives to me, is so valuable to me. And that's what I just wanted to share today, because I don't think a lot of creators talk about this. The internal benefits to actually consciously creating, the effects it can have on your mind when you go about it in the right way, when you're going about it like, I guess I learned to do this by doing it the bad way the first time. Again, the contrast, the extreme. So that's basically it today. That's the conscious creative process. The number one takeaway for you is to, well, I'm a writer, so just start writing. Just start writing, and it's like, what's the worst that can happen? Like, you'll find things out, and you'll it's difficult though, especially at the beginning. I found writing, even reading was hard for me at the beginning. It was like reading a page or 2 pages and my eyes would be tired and I'd be like, oh. But you just keep at it, and then you get better over time. You should just make it a habit. And I will say that reading and writing are invaluable skills. Like, they will pay dividends for you in the future if you stick at it for the long term. So that's it for today. Thanks again for listening, and I will see you on the next episode.